Welcome, everyone. My name is Venu Gopal Nair. This is episode 70 of the My First Job podcast. And today we have an ace researcher based out of Saskatoon in Canada. He's literally on the other end of the world. Prakash sees immense potential in pursuing a career in botany, which he's been doing over the past 30 years, because he believes it offers the potential to be entrepreneurial. For those who are interested, and this doesn't mean becoming an entrepreneur, it means defining what you want to do. And for those interested, there's a wide canvas of options available to be tapped. Prakash, welcome to the show. Great to have you.
Greetings, Venu. Glad to be on your show, and greetings to the audience. I'm looking forward to the next an hour of interesting conversation.
Great. So, why don't we begin with how your interest in botany began?
Sure. Since you're in Chennai, I should say a big greetings to all the Chennai people watching because I am a thoroughbred Chennai student and still imagine the days that I spent in Chennai as a student. I studied in
Great.
Madras Christian College,
You
in
passed out in botany, you did botany, and
botany, yeah, but
okay,
specializing in different aspects of botany.
okay,
And so it's been a long journey, and then my curiosity reached a peak uh, after I did my master's, and then I pursued my, further research in Canada, right? So I've been here for the last 30 odd years. Yeah,
okay.
that's been
So,
my
how did the
trajectory.
move to Canada come about?
Yeah, because when you study, one thing we have to remember is why is botany so important? Botany, if let me put it into context a little bit so that the audience can travel with us. The word botany for the non-botany folks, those who don't know what botany is basically the term, the etymology of the word botany uh, refers to study of, vegetation that is mostly grasslands, pasture. That's where the root word is. And then eventually, it slowly transformed to the study of plants that were useful for us, like, and then eventually the study of the plant world. So you can see that the botany has this relations deeply rooted to the grasslands, the prairies. And maybe that's why I ended up in the prairies in Canada. I don't know. I'm just joking. But but
Okay,
stemming from that, the concept of botany, if you look at the whole part of India, the southern part of India, is one of the biodiverse hotspots, right? It's so rich. And so I landed in the right place at the right time in many ways because I landed in Madras Christian College. I had
right,
met very interesting researchers and teachers, and I was in a landscape full of vegetation because there's
right.
not big buildings, and the ghats are nearby. You travel to these mountains, you see the vegetation, and then you
Okay,
get the full spectrum that plants are not just what we eat and what we see. They are out in the forest, they are out in the mountains, they are out in the Arctic. Wherever you go, there are plants, right?
right.
And suddenly it becomes a living enterprise. And that's how I got curious. How I ended
But
up in Canada. Yeah.
okay, so just this thing to take you back, did your curiosity begin much before in class in school itself, or is it that when you decided to do your graduation, you opted for botany?
Yeah, I kind of, it was a fallout with humans that led me to plants actually.
Okay,
Because I was in grade nine and, I was studying in a school in grade nine, and they suddenly told me that I have to learn some third language
okay,
in order to pass the model exam to pass grade 10 or class
right,
10.
right,
Then I said, why should I do that? I don't have to learn a new language just because I want
right.
to pass grade 10. And I had a
Okay,
fallout with the school administration and I left the school.
okay,
So I spent 1 year, going between many libraries in Chennai, from Kanimura
okay,
Library to British Council to American Council, all these libraries. And they used to be my storehouse. And as I explored this, I found that the world is much bigger than what you study in the school systems. There's so many
right,
books, so many concepts,
Right.
And when I started engaging with that, I found that the least number of books I could get a hold on was about plants.
Okay.
There was many other books that I could read, but about plants, if I want to identify a plant, if I want to do something, I couldn't find much information. Then the curiosity peaked because I went to a medical exhibition where I saw an open cadaver.
Okay.
And then the first thing that hit me was, well, look at if you look at how the gut and the intestine is arranged, the whole thing is arranged to digest food, right? So it hit me
Right.
that something in the plants is causing this digestive system to be so big. It's not just like a simple machine, like a stomach, something that processes and just shunts out the waste. There's a long, small, and large intestine, and the whole works. So I figured that the plants, in some way, have mastered the ecosystem of humans and animals, and that's the main thing that triggered me. So we think that we get food from them, but I thought I had the sudden epiphany that they're controlling us by giving us food, and that started the journey basically.
Yeah, this is something that Michael Pollan has said about the orchids as to how
Exactly.
they've, sort
Yeah.
of taken over the entire world and
Yeah.
done it that way. Okay, so how did the trip to Canada happen? You applied for a position, a research position, or a
Yes.
post graduation?
Yeah. Since from grade 9, 10 onwards, because I've been to so many of these libraries, American, the American library is in the embassy
Right,
near that uh,
flyover,
flyover. Yeah, the Cathedral Road.
chimney flyover.
Yes. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So every time I walk in, you see so many aspiring students come in there looking for college. At that time, it was not online; it was all hard copies,
Yeah,
right?
all books. Yes.
All books. This is in remember it was in late 80s, right?
Yeah.
And when you see the students aspirations, they're looking for things. I start to talk to them. I asked them, so what do you guys do? And they started giving me clues about how you
Okay.
can, right from that early age, I had this thing instilled in me that you can go anywhere to study,
Okay.
right? And so when it came time, I said, okay, well, how about doing a PhD?
Right.
My curiosity was, the reason why I left, because why I ended up in Canada is because there were 3 or 4 faculties here who were working on flowers.
Okay.
And my question was, how did the flowers come to be? And this was one of the big questions Charles Darwin posed. He said, he called it the abominable mystery of flowering plants. He said that
Okay.
about 150 million years ago, suddenly the world was full of flowering plants. How did that happen? And that
Okay.
hit me like a lightning, because
Yeah. Yeah.
how did that happen? Suddenly you've had conifers and suddenly you get flowering plants in the next 10
Okay.
million years. So I got
Right.
that evolutionary lens also at the same time. You know,
Okay.
not just the small time span, you're looking at like millions of years. And these plants have mastered this terrain for millions of years. And we've been around for a few 100,000 years, 300,000 years.
Right.
That kind of
Right.
timeline triggered in me that these plants are actually wise.
They've been here much before us and they know a lot more about the world than we do. And we assume that with a few 100,000 years or tens of thousands of years of being on planet Earth, we know nature, we know the universe. And here are the plants who don't speak, who don't say a single word, but they've been here, like you said, from 150 million years ago. They figured out how to flower, which was a point of evolution, right?
Yes.
Okay. So why don't you answer that bit, which is why did plants start flowering?
Oh, yes, that's very interesting. See, if you look at, we can start with something very close to us.
Right?
Very close to all humanity is seed, because a lot of our food is based on seeds, right?
Okay.
The wheat we eat, the rice we eat, the corn we eat, the lentils, the peas, the chickpeas, the kidney beans. You think of anything, millet, ragi, all these foods we eat, the staple foods are the seeds. So
Okay.
seeds, so becoming a botanist is a win-win game, because food is essential for humanity.
Right.
right? And so botany is the gateway to this, right? Botany gives you an introduction into this world of how what we call nature, a plant world, produces things, build ecosystems. So, but the challenge the students face when they get in is the truckload of taxonomy that students face, all kinds of names, forms, drawings, and that kind of distracts them, right?
Yeah.
It takes them
Yeah.
away from the journey of exploration to something of frustration, anguish, right?
Right.
And that's the greatest challenge we face in the future of education, right? One of the things is we have to make this interesting.
Right.
The best way to make it interesting is to look at it from the long scope of things. Look at the
Okay.
world about 500 million years ago and see the journey of this planet along with the plants and animals, and then we coming in at some time, forming a relationship with plants. So we ought to always think that we are forming a relationship with plants, right? And I simply call it, easiest way to remember it is we are anthropocentric. So
Okay.
we are our view is human based, but we belong into a zoocentric space. We are all animals.
Okay.
And the plants counterbalance this because they are phytocentric. They build ecosystems, they're primary producers, and they generate all kinds of changes in the environment, which makes this planet habitable. You see, so you can start to shift now from thinking about the world looking through the human eyes to look at it from a plant perspective. And you suddenly
Okay.
see you're an active player along with the plants, co-creating this reality, right? So that's a good way to shift.
And where does the word phyto come from? It's
The
plant.
phyto means phyton is a unit of a plant. A
Oh,
phyton is a unit of a plant. So if you take a leaf, a stem, and a node, that's called a phytomer, a unit of a plant. So
okay.
phyton is a shortened version of phytomer because the mer stands for meric. It's added in units. Plants grow over time, right? They add units. Unlike us, we have segmentation of the vertebrae, but the
Yeah.
plants constantly keep adding units. It's like imagine every year you add another vertebrae, but
Okay.
the plants literally keep adding units,
Okay.
segments, and that's how
Okay.
they become trees or whatever, various forms. And
Okay.
the interesting part for an entry point to botany is to think of all plants in a simple way of considering a universal plant unit. What is a universal plant? It has a root, it has a shoot, it has leaves. Some of them produce flowers and they produce fruits and seeds. But with this basic ingredients, the plants have mastered to make all kinds of forms, from
Right.
grasses to orchids to trees, that can grow on the mountains, they can grow in the valleys, the plains, all kinds of adaptations.
So are they the world's foremost biochemists, even if we don't understand that beyond a point?
No, not just, it's a good word you use, biochemist, right? There's a kind of reactionary element to that, right?
Okay.
Some kind of a process. But what is more interesting is even before we understood biochemistry, the plants understood our chemistry. You know, the reason I say that is this is where it
Okay.
gets really interesting. The reason I say that is there's a whole field called ethnobotany.
Okay.
The ethnobotany is a study of how people interact with plants in local communities, eth-
Okay.
ethnic communities, right? And so I
Right.
was eagerly interested in this when I was in Chennai. I used to explore with a lot of the tribal groups in the mountains, and we used to travel.
Okay.
And what the story you get is they are very sensitive to what kind of plants they use for firewood, what they use for some kind of roofing material. They resource it, and they're very conservative. They know how to maintain a balance. So even the local people, when they live with the plants, they get the knowledge.
Okay.
It's an adaptive situation where they adapt and find out, and then suddenly. So if you go back in history, the early shamans were called medicine men. And what is the
Right.
medicine plants, right?
Right.
And even if you go to South America now, what do? They drink ayahuasca or some kind of psychedelic compounds.
Right.
So that's why I say the plants understand our chemistry. There's a lot of things that alter our mind. A lot of compounds. Sugar. Taking every time you take sugar, you're
Yeah.
having a biochemical experience which the
Okay.
plants are inducing. When you feel sedated or when you eat a piece of chocolate, think phytocentric because they're changing the way you think, literally. But we don't
Yeah.
think like that. Every time you grab a cup of coffee, the caffeine
Right.
is going to act in your system, right?
Right.
So you have to think like that. Right from the morning when you wake up, you brush your teeth, you have a mint taste, the plants have already gotten you. Even before you wake up, they're in you.
And we think we are making choices, that we are deciding what we want to have, and it's as if the plant is the best sales person in the whole world, because without saying a word, without even meaning to dominate you or understand that you're being dominated by them, you are so dependent on every aspect of what plants produce, how they, you know, survive and how they thrive, simply because humans are just a link in their chain and we are not a link in theirs, or the other way around.
Yeah,
I'm
and
not sure.
imagine you step and think like a plant.
Yeah.
They do the entrepreneuring without much noise.
Right.
They're right with you. They're always selling you goods, but you don't even know that. You know, a very transparent marketing strategy. You have to think like that. This is a good way of thinking future. How the future, especially with AI and other things coming in,
Yeah.
the future of the kind of swarm intelligence that the plans show. This is at this point. I want to segue slightly into what would think of as plant intelligence. You know,
Okay.
what we think of as our intelligence is basically sensory, right? We get
Right.
information through perception, and then we
Right.
map the world, right? And we map the world. We intelligently try to interact with it, and we build systems of knowledge around it. But the plants, they don't have, the senses like us. Each one of those senses are swarm intelligence. So they
Okay.
see light in different ways. They see light as energy. They see light as a signal. They see light as the beginning and the end of the day. There's so many ways. They see light as an interplay of food and uh, reflections of different colors. The whole kind of intelligence is bound by how they distribute and perceive the environment. And
Okay.
that's why, if you think of AI, artificial intelligence, it does the same thing. It takes our sensory modality. For example, when we see something, it is broken into many layers of perceptrons. And suddenly you have layered information, which suddenly creates intelligence in artificial system. And so you can think of plants not as artificial intelligence, but I call it adaptive intelligence, right? Because
Wow.
they're building their sensory systems according to their stage of growth. How they see the world when they're a small seedling is very different from how they see when they're slightly older. But they're not seeing it like us. That's the problem. We become teleological when we define this, but it's still an interesting way to think about this in the future, because these plants are basically telling us we make food every day. Why are you guys struggling to harvest the food? Every day the light falls on the leaf, there is enough sugars being produced. We think we are tech savvy. Why can't we? The plants are challenging us. If you're tech savvy, why can't you leave this planet for us? Just take a small part of land and make your food. Why do you want to destroy this planet? You know, and I think we need more and more botanists, because the more and more knowledge we have about the diverse plants, we'll see how important it is as a genetic treasure trove, which can
Right.
adapt to all kinds of changes, including climate change. That's where it's going to go. And that's why I think when you asked if we can do this, I thought that this is the right time, because you know most people don't even know how much this field has to offer in the future. The more and more you start to understand it, not just understanding the plants in the beginning stages, but how it is going to be a very adaptive system through which we're going to recreate many of our social systems. That's where it's going to go. You already
That's
see.
a wonderful way of putting it, Prakash. Moving from artificial intelligence to adaptive intelligence.
Yeah,
And it is as if we have all these examples right around us, but we say that no, technology is our savior
yeah.
because we have to somehow have the technology to figure out how to make things. And we're not even looking at plants because we say that that is just one form of, it's just a species which is surviving by itself, but it's so integrated and it's been around for so much longer than humans have. But we are somehow not willing to accept that intelligence and build from there, except for a small core group of researchers like you who have understood this.
There are a lot of young researchers who are eagerly interested in this field, but the
Okay.
problem is the lack of potential guidance in the early stages. So they do a
Right.
degree and they fall out and they go into the field of computing or some place where they can get a job, because obviously when you come into this field, the persistence is the key. You have to
Right.
be like a plant, you have to persevere, right? But the reward
Yeah.
is the plants teach you a lot of things. It teaches
Right.
you, even if you don't get much out of it. If you do an undergrad in botany, you'll be very patient.
Right.
You learn a lot of patience, because the plants don't do things suddenly, they take time. So your observation skills are very keen. If you
Right.
spend the time with the plant, your observation skills are going to be very keen. Second, you're going to understand something very fundamental about life. You see,
Right.
you learn how the plants fix carbon, how you produce, how the food gets into the supply chain. You understand nature. There's a lot of interesting information that converges as you start to study them. But
Okay.
the challenge we face is, as a young student, is first the structuring of these programs have to be revamped. The structuring.
Okay.
We start, if you go into a classical botany, undergrad program, they start off by classifying organisms. So one of the things that we are trying to engage with many
Ah,
people in society is to build an alternate curriculum.
okay.
But you start with how the planet is,
Okay.
because
Right.
this most of the life on this planet is plants. We live in a plant world, right? So we
Right.
talk about the planet, we talk about the biosphere, and then we talk about how the biosphere evolved. So
Okay.
students get a long window of time to see through into the world of things. And as they look at it, you engage with them how this planet transformed over time.
Right.
Each one of
Right.
those transformation events are related to the way the plants adapted and the animals adapted with them.
Yeah.
And suddenly now, the classification of plants is not a big problem,
Yeah. It's
because
not.
it is, you start to see how they're connected at the core.
Okay.
And then you see the different branches, of different groups of plants. But essentially, to the core, it's called monophyletic, which means that they started from one point and they've continued that path continuously in a
Okay.
continuum. So once you get that, I think botany is going to be one of the most interesting subjects, because it gives you a window into the planet. It gives you a window into how things have changed over time, which is what we're dealing with, climate change and sustainability. So no matter where you go and what you do, this is going to come back at you as an administrator, as a businessman, as an entrepreneur, or as a government agent. Every one of you will be challenged with these questions about sustainability and climate change. So even getting a certificate program in this might be very useful looking into the future, because you can start to think differently. You become more phytocentric. You start to engage, and then eventually you shift from anthro to ecocentric.
Mm.
But the gateway is through the plants. Otherwise you can't understand it. The easiest way to segue into being more ecocentric and balanced is to shift to a phytocentric perspective. Ask how the plants
Right.
came into this world, how things adapted, how things changed, and suddenly you shift from one side of the spectrum to the middle. You don't become a plant,
Wonderful.
obviously, but you come to the middle. And then when you find the balance, that's where, and if you're a botanist, I think if you can, that's what I'm saying, how can you be a better entrepreneur as a botanist? You can get into any one of these fields and help other people. But
Right.
future is people would not want to know more about the plant world.
So give me an understanding of, there is this visual of a thin sapling breaking out of hard rock,
Right,
right? That is used as an analogy for so many things in the world,
right.
that triumphing against the odds, the importance of perseverance. But as a botanist, tell me, how does it happen?
The sapling taking root in between a rock.
Inside a hard stone rock and
Or you can
emerging.
look at hard concrete. Some of the seeds come through hard concrete. I don't know if you've
Okay.
seen a metal
Yes.
road. If there's a small crevice, you'll see a plant sticking out.
How do they
Or on
do
the
it?
roof of after heavy rains, if the
Right.
roof is neglected, tiled roof, you'll see
Right.
small plants sticking out. The seeds
Right.
germinate.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the reason is it goes to the core of how plants adapted actually. When the plants
Okay.
start, not the algae were out in the ocean, right?
Right.
So if you want a short historic or an evolutionary window, plants, the world of plants started very early in evolution, but not as a multicellular form. It was just like a bacteria, it was a unicellular form, right?
Right.
Cyanobacteria. They were the
Right.
first kind of plant like, but they're bacterial structures, but you can think of it as the beginning of plants. And then the actual plant world starts with a group called algae,
Hmm.
unicellular, multicellular forms that are waterbound, mostly in the oceans initially. And then after billions of years, finding the roots in the fresh waters.
Hmm.
And it's only in the last 500 odd million years the plants have moved on to land.
Oh, okay.
So one of the key questions you're asking is about a sapling taking root on a rock, right?
Right.
So in order to do that, they need roots,
Right.
right? So when the plants first moved out of water, they did not have roots.
Okay.
So if you have a rain and if it's very moist, you'll see a green mossy structure growing on rocks and on brick walls, in Kerala
Right.
especially.
Right.
That's all mosses. It's a group of plants called moss, right?
Hmm.
And basically this moss don't have roots. They're
Right.
growing on the debris there, right? But they have root-like structures called unicellular projections called rhizoids. But it took
Okay.
them plants significant amount of time to discover how to form roots.
Okay.
And what is interesting is, from a botanical perspective, that is also their adaptive capacity to regenerate. So if you take a branch of a tree, stick it in water, it'll form roots.
Right.
The reason is because of that. That program to form roots is extremely plastic.
Okay.
So the plants have mastered the art of rooting themselves in very harsh environments, and that's how it started.
Okay.
The
Okay.
first plants had to peg themselves into the soil with small structures, and eventually they grew deeper, and then they were able to move away from water. Basically, as the roots got deeper, they moved away from water and colonized the whole planet, basically, or adapted to different environments of the planet. So the roots are a critical window into. It's also the hidden half, right? You look at a
Right.
huge tree standing
You
under a
can't see it.
huge
Yeah.
tree. You don't see the roots, but there's so much of
Right.
biomass of the roots as much as the main shoot, right? But
Right.
the root systems, how they grow into is that they have two functions. One is to adhere, and the other one to absorb, right?
Okay.
So some of these roots will literally adhere to the rock and eventually find some small crevices where there's moisture,
Wow.
and then they grow. And then if they hit
Okay.
soil, they would go deeper, right?
Okay.
So the roots are, the question is actually very interesting, that how do they grow on these structures? Is because they have these two properties, right? One is to adhere to things, and the
Right.
second is to absorb. So even if there is a little bit of moisture, that's enough for them to grow. And once they start growing, There's more biomass, there's debris, things gather, there's moisture. It traps the moisture
Wow.
from the environment and then it grows. And that's how they grow on all these odd surfaces. But you give them a little bit more water, they'll flourish and grow.
Anyway, wow. I mean, it's such a wonderful story because these things are happening all around us, and we simply neglect it because in our minds, it is as if something, we even use the term something has gone to seed, which is actually an apt description.
Yeah.
But gone to seed is almost as if it is in ruins, it's denuded. And yet, the way you describe it, it's full of life.
Yeah.
Because,
Seed, the seed is a miracle in the world of plants. Is
right,
a miracle because it can go through dormancy phases which last for more than a decade.
wow.
And actually, last few years ago, they discovered a
Huh,
seed which is like 10,000 years old. I forget the number of years. Quite
my
quite an
God.
old seed from the permafrost, and they were able to
Okay.
grow a plant from that. What that means is they they are living structures, right? But they
Right.
self-induce dormancy. They become dormant, right?
Wow.
They desiccate, become dormant, and when they get water, they can grow.
Okay.
And people
So
still,
they are
yeah,
essentially in standby mode for 10,000 years.
exactly.
Wow.
There are a lot of seeds. If you go to Australia, there are seeds
Hmm.
which get trapped in the casing, right? The fruit casing, they get trapped in the casing. Because in Australia you have these bushfires, right? Bushfires are common part of their ecosystems. It's actually a
Right.
fire-based ecosystem. So every
Right.
decade or so they get a forest fire. And here you can see the interesting aspect of how plants participate with that kind of ecosystem. They trap the seeds in a casing, and the seed remains there for decades. And when the fire comes, the smoke burns the fruit, hard fruit, and the smoke actually triggers germination. It's a signal. It uses the smoke to wake up. And then after a few months, the whole place is full of seedlings.
Okay.
But not only that, the same plant, it's a plant called Banksia. The same plant, when they start to germinate and grow in the first few months, they build a bud bank, literally a bank of buds under the soil, and they encase it in a tubal-like structure, right, and
Okay.
remains dormant. And after a few decades, when you get a forest fire, it it raises the tree all the way to the ground, it's burnt. The lignotuber breaks open because the smoke is the trigger to break the bud dormancy. And
Okay.
suddenly you get shoots coming and the whole place is green with not just the seeds but also the resprouting of the trees from the roots. So
Okay.
you have all kinds of strategies, all kinds of strategies a plant use to adapt.
Then let me go to the exact opposite, Prakash. Does it mean that deserts are places where plants just don't have a role, or there are certain desert plants which are made for those environments?
Yeah, a lot of the cacti, the whole world of cacti evolved in deserts.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
so if you look at a cactus, you'll be confused. You wouldn't know how to identify it, right?
Okay.
It's a highly modified structure. It's modified itself. It doesn't do much during the day. It does everything at night.
Okay.
They have a special metabolism which allows them to process food at night. And
Okay.
and because when you want to process things, you need more water, right?
Right.
They don't want to open up their pores during the day. And so they keep the pores closed. They rest during the day. And the night comes, they wake up and they do their business and they get the food going. And they slow down their growth. They grow very slowly,
Okay. Okay.
extremely slowly, and they've adapted. You know,
I mean, and this is such fantastic adaptive intelligence because what I'm seeing through everything that you said is that they don't look at the important thing is not comfort is it's not about because again they don't have to worry about comfort because I assume that plants don't have the stage where living in a desert under the harsh sun they're saying this is damn uncomfortable but they're
no,
perfectly okay just being in that
it's heaven for
environment
them. It's heaven for them.
of plants deep underwater under the oceans. which are living in a completely aquatic environments, it's like they will take whatever is available and figure out a way to make their chemistry work in that environment, right?
Yeah, it's just not that. They are very
Hmm.
compassionate beings. They're always,
Okay.
I'm being very teleological here, looking at the plant like a human. But still, I think there's a lot of interesting things one can think of.
Okay.
You see how people adapt to their environment is to understand
Right.
how plants work there, right? If you go
Okay.
to Africa, they have these these huge trees
Yeah.
from which they
Yeah.
can extract water, right?
Very bulbous kind of trees, right?
Yes,
Huh.
baobab. They call it baobab
Okay.
trees. Yeah,
Okay.
you can actually extract water from the trunk.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
and if you go to the deserted conditions in a lot of part in the in Mexican regions, there's so many different types of cacti. The whole aloe vera comes from there. The aloe vera
Right.
is a desert plant. But it holds
Right.
moisture, it softens your skin. Everybody uses aloe vera, for makeup and all that. It comes from a desert plant. Who would think?
Right. Right.
There's so many examples that would fascinate. Especially if you start to dig deeper. And like you
Hmm.
suggested, Michael Pollan is a good entry if you're interested in reading.
Right.
Michael Pollan
Right.
has written wonderful books, and each
Right.
one of them is phenomenal because the first book is called The Botany of Desire,
Right.
right? It starts with the desire, and the latest book he wrote was How Plants Change Our Minds. It's all about these compounds of plants that gives us altered states of experiences of consciousness, right? So
Hmm.
he's traversed the whole. In between, he wrote a lot of book about food production and how we cook food, and eventually he came to how the plants change our minds, how the, you know, all the
Right.
compounds in
And
magic mushrooms and all that stuff. Yeah.
okay, we will just do this little deviation for about 3, 4 minutes. I know that this particular thing is only about jobs, but I want to go in one place and then have your answer on that for about 2 or 3 minutes, which is, are plants the ultimate spiritual beings?
In many ways, we can't, see when you look at like for example, let's take a guru. Everybody will relate to this. It's a good way to start. Spirituality has to have some identity. So
Right,
one of the key identities I always think about is the saint. His name is Ramana Maharishi.
right,
He was a Mauni most of his time.
right,
And anybody asks him, what is your path? He'll say, Nan Yar. Who am I? Right? And if you stand next to a plant, the plant will say, who am I? The reason I'm saying that is they don't speak much,
right. At
but they
all.
grow, right?
Yeah.
They
Okay.
grow. And that is
Right,
the core of spirituality, isn't it? The core of
right,
spirituality is you can't showcase it,
right,
but over time you embody it in some form.
right,
They'll say, oh, it's nice to be around Venu. He's very quiet. He's very, there'll be some compliments which
right,
relates to your spiritual side. Doesn't have to be perfect.
right,
When you see a part of humanity which is compassionate, which is quiet, which is polite, the word
right,
spiritual is attached to it.
right,
And the other thing about spirituality is something that grows over time, right? And that's why the metaphor of a bud opening without it being pried open. Spirituality is the same thing. You can't pry it open to get something. You let it happen, right? And so the metaphor of the flower, right? You watch the bud and it slowly opens. And every
right,
day in the morning, what do the people do? They go to the plants to harvest the flowers and give it to the gods.
right,
Or sometimes even harvest flowers to give it to the coffins, right? So we give flowers in all occasions. And
right.
all our festivals, whether spiritual or not, are
Flowers are an intrinsic part of the whole
flowers,
experience.
fruits, leaves, all kinds of things. Yeah.
Okay.
So spirituality and the other aspect of spirituality and plants is this is where I was telling you the early humanity before they became identified as tribal groups. There was this intrinsic necessity for them to associate with plants, and so
Okay.
there was a spiritual enterprise to begin with. And I think the spirituality in humans began with plants. So you have to think of it
Right.
that way. Yeah.
Right. Amazing, Prakash. We'll have to come back to Earth on this one. And
Okay.
let's go through some practical ways in which students can enter the field of botany and what is the career path that they can take. And here's another thing. A lot of people begin to look at this because they say salary. They look at it. So if you can take out, obviously, things have changed over the last several decades. So if you can talk of a salary band, which is what happens when you start at this to what people can go up to, and what are the various explorations of a job that they can undertake.
Yeah, this is where, the plans make you think entrepreneurial. So when you get in
Okay.
there, if you're just going in for a degree, this is probably not your cup of tea, right? You have to
Yeah.
have a deep interest. But when you have a
Right.
deep interest and you're engaged, you like to
Right.
communicate with people, all the
Right.
business acumen you develop when you do an MBA, right?
Right.
All those are innately developed in a student who's eagerly interested in the world of botany because he has to communicate, he has to go and engage with all kinds of people. Unlike other degrees which can be done indoors, the future of botany will be outdoors, I think. And the
Right.
more and more we start to see that, we are resetting something very fundamental. This is why I urge students to explore this because it is a wide open field. The first thing you have to remember is the field of botany is a wide open field. Not
Right.
many people get into it, first of all. Even if they
Right.
get into it, they don't use it as a career choice. They just have a degree. Some of them go into teaching profession, right? Very few go on to do research. And even if they do research after a few years, they quit and do some computing program course and get a job, right? But if you persevere, then obviously you're going to be the tree, right?
Right.
That's the capacity you have, perseverance. But there are many small incremental joys along the way. I classify
Right.
them as joy, pure joy, because um, you're outdoors. If you're really engaged with the world of plants, you're outdoors studying them first. Then you know your food systems better, right? So even if you don't want to go into the field of just studying plants, you can study crops, right?
Mm.
Then entry into and crops are going to be a huge target for the next decade or two, right? Because
Yeah.
as climate change sets in, they want people who have better knowledge about how plants work, not how
Right.
you breed plants, but how plants work, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
this is where so far people have been focused on technology, information, field of information, and India has provided a rich resource. But we cannot forget our botanical history. I'll
Right.
put India into context because some of the brilliant scientists, M.S. Swaminathan from Chennai, he started in the field of botany. Um,
Right.
a lot of the fantastic botanists came from Delhi University, that region, JNU, in the 50s and 60s, who worked on tissue culture and embryogenesis. And that culture was gone, right? Because over time, um, there was no intense participation, right? And so the lack of is not something of a problem because that's where it becomes entrepreneurial. It's a field that is ready to be nourished, right?
Mm.
But now
Mm.
you have to see how you can nourish it. And the way you nourish it is climate change, number one, your food systems, your environment, right? And then obviously your urban spaces. All of them have a lot of wisdom that needs to be poured into to make it sustainable. And where
Mm.
else do you start? It's in the world of plants. So you should not limit yourself to what the classroom environment tells you, but you have to start to groom yourself. This is
Right.
what I tell botanists. You have to groom yourself to understand how plants participate in the anthropocentric space. And when you start to see that, by the time you're in the second year of your degree, you'll be reaching out and you'll start to build those networks to expand and not just be trapped in the groove of studying plants for plants' sake, but interacting, bringing the plants back into the human perspective. There's a lot of potential there, and that's where I say the field is open.
And exactly like you mentioned, plants are prepared to be dormant for thousands of years. They don't complain about the environment they're in, they adapt to it. And I think, like you uh, wonderfully pointed out, plants are not looking for the world to be built around them. They're simply saying, whatever exists, I will then transform myself into how I can survive no matter how the world is. So, taking something like a bushfire, I didn't know this at all, and say that the outer fleshy structure is, and the smoke becomes, the fleshy structure is destroyed, but the inner seed, that is the signal for germination,
Yeah,
or a plant discovering moisture inside the crevices of a rock, which is seen as one of the driest surfaces possible. So
right,
essentially, they're working with heat, light, and figuring out how I can synthesize anything that I need to survive,
right,
which I think is a metaphor for life.
right, right. The other thing for students to remember is botany is not like it was 40, 50 years ago,
Okay,
because botany is very closely integrated with biotechnology, right?
right.
So when you do a biotech from a plant perspective, you have an
Hmm.
edge comparing to just doing a biotech degree, because
Okay.
you're going to apply it for the future of food production, future of tissue culture, so many things that are going to be, revamped as we face climate change. There's going to be more and more indoor growth facilities like greenhouses, vertical
Hmm.
farms, and each
Hmm.
one of them needs technical know-how of plants work. And
Right.
so, with the AI industry growing, AI is not something that you're going to struggle to learn. What wisdom you'll be lacking is what these plans are all about. And so if you have the knowledge framework and the technology, if you're tech savvy, you will be an entrepreneur, there's no doubt. But one of the key things now also we should remember is the field of what they call, genome sciences. We're
Hmm.
sequencing DNA, right?
Right.
You must have heard of people sequencing their own DNA, right?
Right. Right.
And DNA sequencing is so cheap. So what's
Right.
going to be the future is you're going to start understanding these plants, their intelligence, adaptive intelligence, at the genomic level, at the DNA level.
Okay.
And then the field
Is
is
there
wide
a
open there.
danger in, because genetically modified foods have always been a source of controversy?
Yes.
So, from someone who's been in the business or in research for 30 years, what is your take on when we start experimenting with the genomic structure of plants and assume that we've begun to understand?
Yeah.
Are we then playing with fire, or you believe that that is simply that plants, that is the only way to learn?
The plants have always been doing that. They hybridize very widely. Unlike animals, see, in animals, they breed within the very narrow bandwidth.
Right.
But the plants also are mostly narrow band, but they can wide hybridize. That's why you have
Okay.
hybrids, right? When you do farming, you
Right.
get produce hybrids.
Right.
So the wide hybridization means the genomic flexibility. They're flexible with their genomics, right? And so that's why they're so adaptive. They're very
Right.
adaptive frameworks. But what we have done is we have taken a few plants like rice, wheat, corn, for example, and put them into these treadmills. They want to run wild. We have put them on treadmills, right?
Right.
And they're sweating to produce food for us, literally. Instead of having fun, these plants are literally sweating. They're not having fun, basically, right?
What a
If you let
terrific
them
way to
go,
describe it, because you're narrowing that entire, their ability to. So, what is the way to get them off the treadmill and get the world to produce the food it needs? What is your take on that?
first is education.
Okay.
See, we have so many orphan crops. Take India. If you go to the rural areas in India, so many small crops which people ignore, like millets, ragi, small crops in different parts of India and many parts of the world. If you go to Ethiopia, there's teff, all kinds of orphan crops, right? So the botanist will have much more knowledge about how to integrate them into future crops,
Yeah.
right? Because they're going to integrate their wisdom about how plants form. Because most of the people in agriculture, they don't have botanical wisdom. They are botanically speaking ignorant. They
Okay.
know only wheat, rice, and they're going to tell you every day that we are going to save your world. They cannot. They can only breed things, and they're caught in that treadmill approach. So the
Right.
botanist
Right.
can bring in a lot of wisdom. a lot of wisdom. And because they face challenges, because these are all treadmill systems of learning, if you go into agriculture center, it's a treadmill approach. But the botanist can go between these. And so the botanist, by innate nature, has to be entrepreneurial. He cannot say,
Right.
I'm just going to settle down on this and just do what is being told. They're going to question things. And if you're
Right.
questioning things, you're going to be entrepreneurial, you're going to be doing things. And I think if you are approaching it correctly, there are many things converging for a student of botany to really explore this domain of change now: climate change, sustainability, food production, the genomics, biotechnology, and the future food systems. You can think of food in different ways.
Yeah.
The plants, that's what I was telling you, the plants, every time they make a leaf,
Huh.
they're basically looking at you and saying, guys, how can you not extract sugar from here? Why are you waiting for another 4 months for me to produce a few seeds and get a little bit of food? I'm producing food every day.
Right.
Where is your intelligence? You're waiting for 4 months and then harvesting a few seeds, which people did 8,000 years ago, and you keep doing the same thing, but your phones are operating system 14. And basically, the agricultural system is operating system 1.5. You have to think of it that way. And see,
Okay,
there's
this
a
is
lot
a
of
very
entrepreneurship involved there.
so this is a very sci-fi kind of question. Do you think at any point humans can adapt to synthesize their own food from the systems that they already have, or these are completely different systems?
The future of food already has slowly started to become synthetic.
Okay.
It's becoming synthetic, but the synthetic aspect is not aligned with how the plants work.
Okay.
See, the plants produce a very diverse, range of chemistry, right?
Right.
But our food systems has been more and more narrow. We talk about, if you go to a dietitian, they'll say how much of protein, carbs, and fats you get. The
Right.
plants are literally laughing their pants out. They're producing millions of chemicals. Talking about these three compounds. You go to a buffet and you just eat rice and sambar and come out. Literally, that's how it is. Literally,
Okay.
the chemistry of plants is so diverse, right? But humans have alienated themselves and they're worried about toxicity. But the early
Right.
humans were not. They were experimenting. They were getting their highs sometimes, or they were
Yeah. It
getting
was.
some toxicity, but they were
Yeah.
willing to experiment. But with all the wisdom we have now, I think, the botanists are the ones who are going to lead this enterprise of all kinds. See, imagine the hotel industry, culinary industry. If you bring in a two or need new three menu items in your menu, you're going to stand out.
Right.
And if you
Right.
make your hotel industry botanically attractive, which means as people walk in, they get a botanical view of their food, you know,
Okay.
engaging their space in different. There's so many options, There's so many options for, especially for who are entrepreneurs. The
Right.
plans will just trigger your systems. They'll make you think in different ways. So you
Yeah.
just have to shift your perspective, to a
And what you're
phytocentric.
saying essentially is that imagine a snack which is not fried but is very good for you, which you can sell in very large numbers,
Yeah,
is probably the next food revolution, because it's fine, because that
yeah,
in some way can synthesize what happens inside you
yeah.
instead of eating something. So if you say that, plants are essentially doing that, right? They're saying that you like sweet, I'll produce this for you. And
They're
you're a
always, yeah, they're always
transport
innovating there. Yeah,
mechanism. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
They're innovating all the time. Some of these
Right.
chemicals that are there can be
Yeah.
life saving for many people.
Right.
As we
Right.
as we live longer, a lot of the
Right.
phytochemistry is going to make us live healthier.
Right.
There's a lot of compounds which we can discover from plants. Even if you discover one compound, and if you can entrepreneur that,
Right.
you're going to be having a very sustainable industry around that. So there's so many scopes one can think of. But first thing is, just being around the world of plants as a student
Right. Right. Learn from
shifts
them.
you. shifts you from all the nerve-wracking tensions you have when you go through other programs. This program relaxes you first. So it starts in the right framework. Right now, students go into this university, they get squished out, and they have to get a job.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no pressure. You just work through it because the plants are around you. They're part of the nature. You work through it, and you slowly build your entrepreneurship. That's how you should start. We should start thinking, because
Yeah.
see, this is not just one aspect of it. There are so many other aspects. I'll tell you one aspect which is completely out of the box. Just to give you an
Okay.
example,
Right.
there's a field called forest psychology. You
Wow.
know, where people walk you into the forest and change your moods.
Right.
They guide you through the world of plants, and then after
Okay.
an hour of walk, you come out, you feel better.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
taking any compounds to take over your mood change, nothing. Just walking
Nothing.
around these plants. So
Right.
these are the kind of things, So this is, where else do you need to go? India is a very biodiverse country. These are the kind of
Right.
things, where
That we should
you
be
can,
looking at. Yeah.
yeah, we should be thinking about. In my own ways, I call it phytocentric living spaces, phytocentric
Right.
monasteries, or phytocentric
Right.
universities, things of that sort. Yeah,
Wonderful, Prakash. I think we must leave it there for now because it's only
sure,
because I've exhausted the time. I think you have triggered something where we should explore this in much greater detail because you have given me a view of not just careers in botany, but how adaptive intelligence is so much more superior than artificial intelligence.
right.
In some ways, we think of this and essentially we want this to adapt. We want to go to a place where we then have better solutions, we have better health, and we have a better understanding of the world,
Right.
which is essentially what plants have been doing for ages, much before humans came on Earth.
Yes.
Okay. So, finally, in short, what is your clarion call to students who want to come into this business?
Just being part of nature first.
Yeah,
First part of nature. So it's stress free. Number one, when you
right,
step into a botany class, it is stress free because you're engaged with nature,
right.
and that's a good place to start. That will be my
Begin.
call. The simple call is, when you walk in, you're walking into nature basically, because botany
Wonderful.
is about the world of plants. Where else can you get that wisdom? And this is the
Wonderful.
least represented for, most of the courses are, enticing students about the job prospects and all that. Here there's nothing of that sort. It's just the world of plants. You come in, discover yourself basically.
Wonderful, Prakash. Thank you for coming on the show. It's been, as always, a mind blowing experience talking to you. And I hope anyone who watches this will understand what a great future is available for the asking. Thank you for
Yes,
coming on the show.
you're welcome.